now my mind is blown. No surprise, guess I should have known. Oh, my mind, now my mind is blown. No surprise, guess I should have known. You got control of me, break my barricades. Walls are crumbling grounds, they shake. You came to save, but it's way too late. Every single time you stay, I cave.
Of Neurodivergent News Live. We have with us again, obviously, the amazing me, Deanna Brakefield, neurodivergent mom, advocate, and entrepreneur. I have with me again today the amazing Jeremy Brakefield. As many of you know, he is my husband. Jeremy, please take a moment and let them know about yourself.
Hello, I am Jeremy Brakefield, founder of Lionheart Kingdom and co-host of this fine show.
And we have back with us this week the amazing Stone G, who has so many exciting projects on the horizons that we're just blessed to be able to have him with us every week. Stone, please say hello.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stone G. I am a counselor for neurodivergent people. I am sitting here in my office on the Gold Coast in Australia.
Absolutely amazing. You know, sometimes I feel like when we're having a conversation, we may be on the Truman Show. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. But my silliness completely aside, today we actually have a really big topic on the docket. And it's one I've been looking forward to bringing forward into the limelight on the show, and it's executive dysfunction. Specifically, there has been a misframing in society in general that neurodivergent individuals, we have this inherent laziness to us. And that's just not the case. It's a neurological challenge that many of us face that impacts not just how we start, but how we finish things. So, I mean, in a nutshell, executive dysfunction is not laziness. It's something that we just need to learn to understand, especially if we're going to overcome it. So, opening thoughts?
Yeah, I find that the language is interesting. I don't see that executive dysfunction is something that we need to overcome. It's more accurate to say that it's something for us to understand and identify. And also describing it as executive dysfunction frames it in the light of us being broken or something of that nature. And we're not broken. So until there's another phrase for it, it's important for us to look at executive dysfunction as described clinically is when we don't have dopamine for a particular event. Mm-hmm. So that's very distinct from being lazy.
Right.
It's like if you get in your car and you have no petrol, you're not going to be alarmed and think, "Oh, this is a travesty. Why is my car so lazy?" No, the car just doesn't have petrol. Just put some petrol in.
And that's an interesting analogy that you use. I just never loathe to be overly personal on this show. You guys know that at this point. For me, there are moments when I'm sitting somewhere and I know I need to be going and doing another thing. There's no question that I know I need to get up and go and do that thing. And no matter, you described it as gas, it's almost impossible to get up and make myself go and do the thing. Even if somebody tells me I have to do it, in fact, sometimes that just brings out my defiance side, and then I definitely don't want to go and do it. It's almost like a catch-22.
Yeah. So when we spoke earlier, we were talking about having awareness of the scenario, which is to be aware of one's own proclivities. Mm-hmm. There's a way that we can plan out our day so that these types of things can be mitigated. For instance, I am a morning person, all my best work, all my best creativity is in the morning. It's why I don't plan client meetings or anything important in the late afternoon or evening, because that's when I'm winding down. And we need to be responsible for those things. We need to be responsible for what part of the day do we have the most spoons, and when do those spoons start to drop off, and what are some of the things that we can do to increase the number of spoons that we have.
For people watching and listening, that are specifically looking for tools to be able to accommodate themselves to learn how to live their lives, would this example that you've illuminated, would that be considered an energy-based scheduling technique?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's interesting that society has this thing that we're not meant to know how to take care of ourselves. If you have a problem, you go to a doctor, or you go to this mental health practitioner, or whatever. It is important that humans start to be more introspective and reflective, and start noticing their cycles. When you look at nature, it is normal that as the seasons change, plants, they change. They might drop their leaves, they might have more green, they might start growing leaves, or they might start producing fruit. And humans don't seem to be 100% aware of that. And as neurodivergent people, we need to be even more aware of our own cycles.
I mean, I think that's very important. It sounds like you're essentially saying that we're not lazy. Wait, we've said this before. We're living in a world that isn't built for us, because neurotypicals tend to be very, very linear in their task approaches. And let's be real, this executive dysfunction cycle, it's almost like a hamster wheel you can't get off of, but it comes back around in cycles instead of linearly.
Mm. And when we look at the word lazy, that's not a scientific term. That's a value term. Executive dysfunction describes how our brain works. Let's say that there are 10 of us, and I'm talking about there are 10 human beings. No, those are the only human beings on the planet. Those 10 human beings are going to fall into a natural homeostasis where they all support one another. Maybe one of them is skilled at fishing, another one is skilled at cultivating the ground, another one is skilled at some other attribute that's necessary to keep those 10 people alive. They're all going to contribute. And one of those, because we know that 1 in 10 human beings are neurodiverse, one of those people is going to be focused on one particular aspect that is also essential for that group to thrive. And we have forgotten that. We have forgotten that neurodiversity is necessary for humanity to thrive.
So
I think it's a little bit more than that. Because for me, stepping back and looking at it objectively, somewhere in like the 90s and 2000s, this idea started developing that you are enough in and of yourself. You don't need anything else. For women were told you don't need a man, you can just whatever. And everyone was told you are an island unto yourself. You should be able to take care of any problems you have. But at the end of the day, we're all different. We all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. If everybody tries to do everything, everybody's going to fail at half of it. And I feel like that's a lesson that our forefathers knew, but that we've dropped the ball on. Because like you were saying, you take those 10 peoples, you're not gonna have the worst person at fishing going out doing the fishing. You're going to have the best fishermen go and do that. You're going to have the best of each one go and do something. Everybody's not trying to fish. Everybody's not trying to blacksmith. Everybody's not trying to farm. You let the people that's their talent do it, but we're in a world now where if your talent doesn't measure up to what they think everybody is supposed to be, all of a sudden you're now less than. And I think that's a lesson that we have missed somewhere over the past 10, 20 years of teaching.
Well, now you're talking about that internalized ableism that we all have as part of our societal imprinting, where because we grew up in this world, society has told us this is what normal looks like. And when you deviate away from that normal, now you're starting to diminish yourself because you think that you are flawed. I can say this is a personal, like a really personal thing for me, because my husband can affirm that I'm not a daytime person. Stone said that he's great in the morning. I don't start to come alive until around this time of day every day. So me scheduling 8 and 9, 10 a.m. meetings, I'm not going to show up at my best. I'm going to be grumpy, and I'm only going to remember a third of what we talked about. But if you catch me after lunch, I'm a completely different person. It's only when I try to make myself live that daytime to nighttime schedule that I start to feel like an active failure because I can't conform. But if I let my natural rhythm play out, we're not going to talk about what I've gotten done in the middle of the night when everybody in the house was asleep and I'm going like the Energizer Bunny, rearranging the whole house, and they wake up the next morning going, what did mom do now? But it's that anybody looking in sees me functioning from lunch till like 4 a.m. and they assume I'm doing it wrong because doesn't look like what everybody else does.
Because it's not that 9 to 5.
And that's a real hurt for, I think, a lot of neurodivergent individuals, is we don't have those standard rhythms that conform to that daytime schedule.
I like what you said about that being internalized ableism. And so we're right back to where we always end up, which is community. Being surrounded
Absolutely.
with a community of people who affirm, accept, and celebrate you exactly the way you are.
Okay, so I do want to shift gears just a little bit and pull on your clinical brain, because we're talking about this thing called executive dysfunction that implies that there's something wrong with us, but we haven't defined what executive functions are. So from your perspective, what are executive functions?
Well, I'll read it just so that we're tight on that.
Okay.
Executive function refers to impairments in a set of mental processes that help us plan, initiate, manage time, organize to shift focus, regulate emotions, and follow through on tasks. And these processes are primarily managed by the prefrontal cortex of the brain.
Okay.
And that's the area that functions differently in many of us. And that's where laziness is a value judgment, not a scientific term. Even though it's described, and I said this earlier, even though it's described as executive dysfunction, you really need to change our language around that. And I don't think we're going to get to it in this program. It's not a dysfunction. We are different in the way that we process content. So if we can
okay.
get to the part about us being different rather than impaired, it opens up so many more opportunities for us.
Okay,
Right.
So if I heard you correctly, the executive functions are those things like task initiation, your working memory, self-monitoring and impulse control. It's all of those little things that we're constantly nitpicked and told we're not good at.
Yeah, exactly. And time blindness, that's a real thing. If you don't have dopamine, or you don't, go back to the car example, if you don't have the petrol to continue in that direction, then it's not a circumstance of you being lazy. You just don't have the fuel for that particular thing. So it means that we get to focus on other things.
Okay. So, I mean, we are talking to the general neurodivergent community. So, some of
Mm,
us, we might have emotional regulation issues. Other people might have working memory issues. It's a very personal, depending on your diagnosis and your individual symptoms, how you get hit.
yeah, yeah, and it, I'm always wary of giving people suggestions, especially in a
Mhm.
counseling environment, because whatever suggestion I provide, that's not their lived experience. Neurodiversity is a spectrum, and so everyone's going to have different tactics for the way that they address their situation. It's easier to have to have a framework for someone who's neurodiverse, who's looking at executive function challenges. They might say, okay, what is the thing that I want to accomplish? Want to I want to be able to get my reports done. And one of the ways that let's say that we'll just talk about getting reports done. That's some administrative task.
Hmm.
Well, what's another thing that you love doing that you could do at the same time while getting your reports done? Uh, what about body doubling? I find for myself, body doubling is very effective. Whenever I have my support worker working with me, they just have to sit in the background and I become enormously more productive. So it is situational. There are multiple ways to mitigate things without saying that one is a failure or lazy.
No, and I completely agree. I think that unempirical word lazy is the root of so many unhappy and unfulfilled people in general, let alone our neurodivergent community who gets land blasted with it constantly.
Mm, yeah, yeah. It's not factual. It's not true. It's not based in science. There's no validity to it.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's bust open this laziness thing just a little bit. So
Mm,
we hear things like, well, you're not motivated. You're just making excuses. You're not trying hard enough. You're just procrastinating. These statements are so subjective. Who
yeah,
says? Who
yeah,
decided whether it was an excuse or a fact? Who decided, like, how did you peek in my brain and see what my motivations were? Like, who says?
yeah. And before we address the myth, um, it could be more useful to address why would we be listening to someone who says something like why would we have them in our sphere of influence as a place where we get our cup filled? I mean, that's poisonous. I'm not drinking poison. I'm not going to accept any type of content that diminishes my character, my identity, or any of those things. But staying with your question, uh, what is a way that we can bust some of these myths? Well, we bust the myth in the first instance by understanding that there's no scientific basis to it.
Absolutely.
That part is satisfied by our intellect, our cognitive brain. It's not satisfied by our uh, amygdala. Our amygdala is feeling and doesn't feel connected and feels sometimes shamed or upset. And there are ways to satisfy that as well. And I think that would be good to list. What are some ways that we can start to feel good about ourselves when we're in an environment that perhaps doesn't contribute to the divinity of our identity?
The divinity of our identity. I think I like
Yeah.
that.
When I go out in nature, when I go out in my garden, like right now, there's a ton of raspberries growing, and I have all this passion fruit that I need to go out and harvest. I feel very close to that, and and all these pieces of fruit that I'm harvesting, they're all slightly different. Some are more tart than others. They're all amazing, and that's what I do for myself to realign with my identity. What are some of the things that both of you might do?
Jeremy, since he won't go, I will. I'm an avid crocheter. It's something I picked up when I was very young. No, don't get me wrong. I live in the southern United States. I tried my hand at growing tomatoes and discovered I have a black thumb, so I leave the gardening to other people. But when it comes to crochet, that was something I picked up when I was very young. I can sit down with a hook and a ball of yarn, no pattern, and zone out for hours and just have this thing that it almost magically appeared in my lap and just leaves me in awe that human beings are capable of something like that, not just me. And then you get to share it. Because I don't know if you know any crocheter that keeps their work. They're usually making it for somebody and give it away. And so that sharing of something you created with your own hands, there's a moment there.
Yeah. It sounds to me that you're talking about being in flow. So you've identified something that you enjoy, and it's when you're in flow.
I missed the point a little bit.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Say that again?
I said sorry. I think I missed the point a little bit. It happens sometimes.
Well, it sounds like you're sharing about being in flow. So we were talking about what are some of the things that we can do where we can realign with the divinity of our identity. And then you started talking about crocheting, which is another way of talking about you being in flow. And Jeremy, he didn't get to share what are some of the things that he does to be in flow, so we're just waiting here for him.
It's in some sort of way, it's refining systems. It's for me. I'm really really in my head. For me, it's all about thought. It's all about thinking, and for me, it's kind of, I guess, a little bit about the puzzle, trying to figure stuff out, trying to understand, trying to. In a lot of ways, I view it as trying to find the fingerprints of God. Because if God created this, then his fingerprints are going to be here, and if you look, you'll find them. But you're not going to find them where you think you're going to find them. You're going to find them everywhere.
So you see patterns in life, in human behavior.
Everywhere. From the way molecules and atoms are put together, to the way the galaxies spin in the sky, to the way humans interact as a family, to the way businesses are conducted. To me, I don't see anything new. Everything functions the exact same with the exact same rules. If you understand how an atom functions and you apply that to a family and you apply that to a business, you're going to have success, because nature teaches us how things are supposed to be. You just have to figure out how to apply that in your specific situation. That's why one of my things is talking about trying to give people tools. When I say tools, I don't mean specific instance. Okay, here's your specific neurodivergence. Here's exactly what you need to do to get better. That's not what I'm talking about. When I say tools, I mean understanding your specific situation and what you need to do to get the outcome that you desire, not the outcome that somebody else desires. Somebody might desire for the Tourette person to just sit down and be quiet, but that might not be where he wants to be. He may be happiest to just go and get him a place out in the middle of the woods where he can scream and do his thing and he doesn't bother anybody. That may be where he is happiest. If that's the case, then more power to him. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody has a different experience. We have to understand everybody's experience is okay. Whether you want to live out in the middle of the woods by yourself, or you want to live in a city with 5 million people right on top of you because you love that interaction. We're all different. We all need different things. We just need to have a way to understand what it is we need. And for me, that's the big push.
So, Deanna, when you think about Jeremy's gifts in pattern recognition, in noticing behaviors, in noticing patterns in nature. What are some of the advantages of that you're noticing that adds to your family?
He often connects events, situations. I won't say behaviors because that's my gift, not his, but he connects events and situations in ways that other people don't notice. And so he ends up getting to the conclusion faster because he saw it sideways instead of straight on, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Do you have a specific example of that?
We know every time we put me on the spot, my brain goes completely blank. That's the fun part about that. Not right off the top of my head.
I can give you one.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Granted, this one's from years back, and it kind of frustrated me a little bit with our youngest son. She would be sitting and playing with him and holding him in her lap, and she was constantly getting her nose busted by him. Because he would be sitting in her lap and he'd put his feet down on the chair or on her thigh and just launch. And so the head would be like right below her chin, and then all of a sudden, boom, up into her nose. And about, I'd say 3/4 of the time, I'm sitting 3 or 4 feet away from her. I'm like, she's about to get busted in the nose. Does she realize this? And so later on down the line, me and her's talking, and we're almost arguing about it. I'm like, stop letting him bust you in the nose. Why do you do that? She's like, I'm just holding him. I'm just playing. I'm like, but I can see it. Why can't you? But that's my pattern recognition. I see that he's playing. I see the position he gets in. I see he's about to launch. But she doesn't have the same pattern recognition I do, so she misses all those little cues that it's about to happen. But that's my gift. That's not her gift.
And yet I'm the extrapolator, because I know Stone could see it, but our audience couldn't. Almost as soon as Jeremy opened his mouth, we're talking like 3 words in, I already knew what story he was going to tell. My face said it all. I already knew what he was about to say.
Yeah. And it's interesting to be able to elicit some of these skills. And as you're going through the elicitation process, you can write them down, you can put them in columns. And I feel good about this now. I feel good listening to how these things play out. And it could also be interesting to take these elicitations and apply them to other areas in our life. For instance, you have these skill sets and you've been effective at producing this podcast. And since I've been on this podcast, it has evolved. And I believe that the next iteration of the podcast is going to be more people listening, more people engaging, more people providing content and asking for more information. But so far, you've done this thing where there's a very solid foundation, and that foundation is continuing to I'll use the word tonify. It's continuing to go deeper, to be stronger, to having a wider base.
Thank you. So based on what we've been saying so far, would it be fair to say that executive dysfunction is the result of us going against those divine abilities that we've been granted? When we try to suppress being involved in those lanes is when we hit that executive dysfunction wall.
Yeah, let's say it in an even more simple way. We experience executive dysfunction when we are not in flow. And we are the ones that are in control of being in flow or not, because we know the areas in which we have more flow.
I like that. Excuse me. Okay. So how do you recognize when you're not in flow? I mean, obviously, many of us, we know once we're deep in it and we're halfway to a panic attack or an anxiety attack, but how do we start to recognize when we're veering into that and before we're in just the soup?
Oh, well, I'll give you an example. I remember one time I was going to a friend's venue. Well, it wasn't a friend, it was a colleague. I was being introduced. And it was at night. And then there were a group of young men. They were drunk. they saw me and they said, "Hey, why are you following us?" And I looked behind me and I thought, who are they talking to? I'm not following anyone. I'm going to my friend's Behi. I didn't say anything to them. But anyway, there were a group, about 10 of them, and they all decided that they wanted to fight me. They wanted to beat me up. And, I thought, oh, this is going to be entertaining. But then I also had to check in with myself of, okay, is this going to be the best for my family? What if I injure one of these people and, there's some type of legal consequence? So rather than engaging with them, I ran.
Logical.
Which meant that was the lowest energy expenditure for me. I got to where I needed to go safely. And those young men, they were not damaged. So that was in flow. Now, if I had engaged with these young men, that would not have been in flow, because I'm not interested in conflict. Whoever they thought it was not that person. It was not following them. I didn't know that they existed until they decided to start talking to me. So we always know when we're in flow because it feels good. I lose hours. I lose so many hours when I'm in the garden. The only reason why I know that time has passed is because it gets dark. And then I hit myself on the head and say, oh, I should have got some floodlights. And there have been times when I've had floodlights in the garden at midnight because I'm doing some, repotting or something like that. That's my inflow moment. And that sensation of being in flow when I'm in the garden, I will take that with me when I'm producing content. For instance, right now I need to write another book worth of content. I have 2 websites that I need to write about 40,000 words for. So that's a lot. And if I just look at writing all those words, I might procrastinate. I might say, okay, I don't have the spoons for that. But because I'm bringing the energy of how it feels for working in my garden, I can do that for an infinite amount of time. Matter of fact, my office is situated such that I can look out on my garden, see the banana trees, see the pineapples, and see all the lushness that's grown.
I find it fascinating the way that you set up that particular flow. So what do you call that? I mean, is there a name for approaching procrastination and executive functioning from that perspective, or is it just?
Yeah, there are several terms for that in the context of what we're talking about. It's called task layering with sensory anchors.
So basically, it's taking that feel-good feeling from the thing that boosts you up over into the next task. And when it starts to wear off, you essentially go get more. It's quite literally, it sounds like gas.
Exactly. And to say that some of the things that, for instance, when I'm writing, I don't know that I enjoy it, but I do enjoy the results of writing. I enjoy it when people are reading it and they get value from it. I enjoy it when the algorithms look at my content and say, hey, this is valuable content. Everyone should read this. So I enjoy that part of it. So it's not entirely true that I don't enjoy X, Y, Z. And I'm making that I statement because it's similar for all of us. There are going to be things that we might say, I don't enjoy X. Is that really true? Is that 100% true? Maybe not.
I can completely understand that, because Jeremy and I actually had a conversation this week about I don't enjoy cooking, but I enjoy the result of the cooking and taking care of my family and seeing them enjoy the food. But in reality, if I didn't enjoy cooking on some level, I would have delegated that off to one of my teenagers because they have the capability to prepare food.
So, Jeremy, I don't think
He's being very quiet today.
Yeah, I don't think you've mentioned a specific task that you are in flow in. You mentioned you enjoy systems. What is a thing that you do that you can lose hours in because it's so enjoyable?
Well, my current thing that I get lost in is my coding. Years back, I had gotten a little bit into coding. I had learned HTML and stuff way back when, and then a couple years back, I guess I got re-bit by the bug, and since then, like after I got into it and actually started refreshing my memory on HTML and learning a few new languages, that aspect of coding, it actually helped me to start to understand myself. Because for me, my communication style is almost that of a computer. My problem that I come to is when the person gives me information and then I begin to assimilate the information and the information doesn't make logical sense. And so I begin trying to use that information, but I use it inaccurately because I'm using it based on like textbook definitions of words and whatnot, and the word that I was actually provided with was being used in a slang manner that I completely missed because of my autism and whatnot and my specificity. And so because of that, a lot of times my thought process will almost emulate a computer, because I'll hear something and my thought process will break down and stop because it's just, wait, error, stop, no, that makes absolutely no sense. But the deeper I've gotten into the programming, the more I understand that about me now, so that when that error gets thrown up, I can actually recognize it now. I can actually understand and go, okay, and so I don't stutter as bad at that point. I don't have to come to a complete grinding halt. I can just stop and go, wait a second, let's step back and think about this a little bit. And generally at this point, I can kind of move past it a little bit. But before that programming knowledge, I didn't even have that option. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I and as you were talking, I was thinking about the different types of languages, and Python comes up for me as a real opportunity because it's so versatile. It can be used for websites, for AI. It's fantastic for automation and just basically taking care of all the admin stuff that we'd rather not deal with. So I can see you really loving working with Python.
The little bit I've learned of it, I like Python thus far.
Yeah, it works. It's fantastic when you're able to work with Python, and it makes it so that you can support AI to be more effective.
Well, since we are talking about Python as a tool, there are I know there are a couple of other things that I use in my day-to-day life and in my business that make things easier. And, some of them are simple things like setting alarms, as long as you can manage not to ignore the alarm, or keeping a calendar on my desk that has all of my appointments, assuming I don't shuffle it under the paperwork and off to the table on the side. But you mentioned body doubling as a possible tool. What are some other things that people could try?
Yeah, well, before deciding on the tactics that are going to support someone to be effective with whatever it is they want, I said this previously, it's very important to recognize one's cycle. because all of these tactics are not effective if someone is outside of their cycle or they're not in flow. You get exponentially more results. So I'll give you an example. If something is not in my calendar, it does not exist.
Yes.
And within my calendar, everything is color coded. So I know what do I need to be focusing on at what time, what is the significance of the thing that I need to be focusing on. And I have two screens. I'm about to get another screen that's just for my calendar. And then I have an operational operational screen. And then I have another screen for things that I need to be focusing on in the next few minutes. These are some tactics that people can use. There's also, let me see if I can say this word right, the Domo technique, where you take a break every 20 minutes. I use that to do between 100 and 500 squats per day, because a lot of my work is sitting down, and we're not designed for that. So I try to keep all my sitting down type work within 3 to 4 days a week, and the rest of the time I'm out in the garden. I'm not out in the garden. I don't have the necessary energy spoons to do the sitting down at my desk type work, which is maybe doing counseling sessions. But I've changed over to group counseling, just so that I could get more leverage and have more energy. And I find working in group counseling scenarios is more fulfilling for me, because I'm getting more data, more variety than working in one-on-one scenarios.
See, I love what you said, because as you were talking, you mentioned you take 20-minute or breaks over periodic amounts of time. That caused me an ungodly amount of anxiety hearing you talk about that. Because if I were to take periodic breaks like that with my specific neurological issues, I would lose my entire day. Because I have to block things together. And in some cases, I have to block days together, because my natural cycle is not a 24-hour period like it sounds like yours is, where you have a high part of the day, a moderate part of the day, and a low part of the day, and you repeat from day to day when things are normal for you. For me, I'll go like almost 2 days straight and then want to sleep for like 14 hours straight. So if I end up blocking things over a chunk of time, I find more success for me.
Yeah, that's also useful. And if you can also include what are the well-being, the physical well-being attributes that are necessary for your meat sack to thrive. And there is a cycle to the well-being of our meat sack. We do still, unfortunately, these bodies are what they are. They haven't evolved very much. And we still require regular sleep so that we can be refueled. We still need community. We require hugs, which is also interesting. And we require nutrition.
Yes. So that is a huge problem for me and a lot of the people that I communicate with, the nutrition, because we become so hyper-focused if we move into an actual executive situation that we actually forget to go to the bathroom or forget to provide ourselves with needs.
Yeah, and that's why I take those. That's why I do those 20-minute breaks. It's not a 20-minute break. It's 20 minutes of intensive work and then a 5-minute break. I do that because I am looking at my physiological well-being. If I'm not well physically, there's a greater chance that I'm going to have a seizure. So I try to keep that rhythm going. Truth be told, it is a bit annoying, especially when I'm in flow and I'm writing a document, or I'm really inspired with something that I'm doing, and then take this break, it does slow me down a little bit. But the plus side is I'm less likely to have a seizure if I'm taking those 5-minute breaks.
Now, how did you discover something like that? Was it trial and error? Did somebody suggest it to you?
It was suggested when I was in when I was in university. The first year, that's some of the things that they talk about.
Okay, that's interesting. So how did they frame that? Like, how do you come at that kind of conversation with somebody about maintaining what we would consider an atypical schedule just because it works for them?
Can you ask the question in a different way?
I can try. Yes, sir. So for the average person, which we hate these stereotypes, but for average people, taking those breaks like that wouldn't be something that would naturally occur to them. It would normally be suggested or discovered through trial and error. So how do you suggest that type of activity to somebody in a positive light?
Well, in my counseling practice, I have a list of things that I'll provide people when they first start. And so I say, here's some tactics that we use that have shown to be effective for most people. And if these don't work for you, let's have a conversation about the types of things that would work for you. And I look for 3 core areas for efficacy, which are physical health, mental health, and health in relationships and vocation. So the tactics tend to be relevant in those 3 categories.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, you did. It sounds like you said essentially you evaluate how is their body doing, how is their mind doing, and how are their relationships doing, and then you move forward from there.
Yes.
Okay. So there's one thing that we haven't talked about, and we are running close to time, and that's that a lot of the executive dysfunctions as we understand them are almost exclusively centered around that word that we already hate, productivity.
Yeah, and which, for the most part, when we get into this topic, we invariably get into a conversation about longevity and community. And if we're not in flow within our community, and that there's a presumption that we're already in an effective community, then productivity, and let's replace the word productivity with fulfillment, then we may not have access to fulfillment. So Jeremy, maybe if you wanted to come up with an equation, not sure how you'd work this out, but if you were to come up with an equation for longevity, my supposition is that would include community and it would include purpose. And we'd have to have a very specific definition on purpose as well as community that would then equal in some facet longevity. And we'd also need to have a very tight definition on longevity.
Okay. So it's more of that we have these ideals, we have these ideas, but we have to redefine what they mean for us as a community and individuals because the societal model is not working.
Yeah. When we say redefine, it's also useful to have a North Star. So if we were to observe nature performs in predictable ways all the time. If we could use that as our North Star for defining what is longevity, what is being purposeful, what is community, then we have something that can be agreed upon by everyone.
And I think that's kind of where we found ourselves is society agreed upon a set of rules and definitions that we had no part of making, and they took no effort to understand us when they made it.
Yes, and society tends to come up with rules that are not aligned with nature, that are not aligned with what it is to be human. And so as neurodivergent people, when we notice these differences, we throw up a red flag and say, hey, that's not working. but the collective agreement or culture is in opposition to nature. So what do? Do we fight against culture? Or do we create our own sustainable communities that are aligned with nature and in harmony?
I think personally for me, I think the answer is actually both. Because we create safe havens for those who are not warriors. And then we have the warriors to begin enlightening the rest of the world.
And another way is that we could create a community first as a model for the rest of the world to follow. That's the way paradigm shifts are started. Enough people, 1% of a population, have an idea or question, and that begins.
And I think that saying that, it's important to point out that the neurodivergent community as a whole is far more than 1%.
It is. Well, unfortunately, we're not a community yet. Perhaps
that's a fair line.
Perhaps it'll take another generation or two before we can start to create our own communities. If we don't, it's unlikely that we'll go extinct because our genome has been here from the beginning. But it will be more difficult for us if we don't create our own.
Okay, so we are nearly at the top of the hour, and just like always, this has been such an engaging and enlightening conversation. Do you gentlemen have any last thoughts before we sign off for the day?
Yeah, I would like to encourage listeners to identify as many areas of their life where they experience flow and just focus on those things. And when they're looking at cultivating their community, allow for people who encourage and raise the vibration of the areas where they find flow. That's a community where one can experience purpose and flow.
I love it. As always, Jeremy?
I believe just keep in mind as you move forward with being the divergence that we are, that there's not anything wrong with you. You're not lazy. And I hate to necessarily kind of put it this way, but you're doing it wrong. And I don't mean that as in a total you're wrong, but just if you're not getting the results you want, then obviously you're doing it wrong and you need to adjust something. So just be objective.
Okay. So I think, and if I'm wrong, call me out because you guys always do. I think we can sum up a lot of this conversation in executive dysfunction is misnamed. It is a series of differences, not a dysfunction, because we are a different neurotype altogether. And that overall, overcoming it, should we choose to use that word, is not about guilt trips and shaming us into doing things their way. It's about support and creating systems that help us achieve the progress we're looking for.
Britt, as always, thank you for your submission.
All right. Well, I've absolutely loved this episode again today. If you found something useful in this, if a tidbit that you want to share, please feel free to share these episodes. They can always be found at kfred.com, as well as many, many other wonderful hosting platforms. You can follow Neurodivergent News on Spotify now. You can follow us on Playery. You can follow us on iHeartRadio. And we would love for you to join our community conversations where you can find all three of us and the amazing guests that we have had through these first few months on our Facebook group or LinkedIn. Just search Neurodivergent News. We look forward to connecting, and everybody have a wonderful and glorious week. Jeremy, throw us that outro music.
You got control of me.